The night shift always began the same way. Lights hummed awake one row at a time. Machines ran their silent checks. Air vents whispered recycled cold through the emergency department. The hospital did not feel asleep. It felt paused, like a room holding its breath. At the far end of the nurse's station, she stood with a clipboard and a box of sealed syringes. No one watched her. Which was why she saw everything. She checked labels, not because they needed checking, but because routine gave her stillness. Stillness gave her information. Across the room, a paramedic rubbed his shoulder and leaned his weight to the left. Strain injury, recent. A triage monitor flashed an irregular oxygen reading on bed 3, sensor loose, not respiratory failure. A janitor's cart sat angled toward the exit instead of parallel to the wall, obstruction if the corridor filled. She adjusted it without looking down. The wheels turned exactly 90 degrees. The exit line cleared. No one noticed. Charting station is full, a voice said. She looked up. Dr. Halvorsen stood there, already impatient. He did not wait for acknowledgement before sliding a stack of files into her hands. Put these into intake order. Not a request. She nodded once. He was already gone. No irritation crossed her face. No sigh. She simply shifted her grip so the files aligned perfectly at the corners. Her thumb rested along the paper edges, holding them square. She moved to the side desk, the one staff used when every other station was taken. The chair there wobbled. She did not sit until she slid a folded gauze pad beneath one leg. The chair steadied instantly. A nurse beside her glanced over. You always fix things like that? Her tone wasn't hostile. Just curious. The quiet nurse answered without looking up. It was uneven. That was all. The other nurse waited for more. None came. She returned to her screen. Across the ER, a television murmured muted headlines no one read. A trauma bay curtain rattled softly under ventilation airflow. Somewhere down the hall, metal clinked, an instrument tray being stacked. The quiet nurse finished sorting files in under a minute. Not quickly. Precisely. Her eyes moved once across the room again. Exit. Hallway corner. Security desk. Ceiling camera. Door hinges. Back to the paperwork. A resident hurried past, nearly colliding with her chair. Sorry. She angled her knees inward just enough to clear his path before impact. He never realized he had almost hit her. He also did not notice she had tracked his reflection in the glass medication cabinet 5 seconds before he reached her. At the central station, Dr. Halvorsen spoke to another physician. We're backed up because triage keeps routing non-critical cases into priority beds. The second doctor shrugged. Night shift. Happens. The quiet nurse spoke without raising her voice. If intake redirects ambulatory patients to corridor chairs first, bed turnover increases. Both doctors looked at her. Not with interest. With mild surprise that she had spoken at all. Dr. Halvorsen gave a polite smile used for interruptions. We'll manage. Thank you. Conversation resumed over her. She lowered her gaze to the files again. No reaction. No insistence. No correction. But she did not erase what she had seen. 2 stretchers blocked a direct path between trauma bay and supply room. 1 4-stand stood unlocked. Oxygen tubing trailed half a step too far into the walking lane. Not problems. Variables. She stood, lifted the 4-stand, coiled the tubing once, and locked the wheel. The adjustment took 3 seconds. A passing orderly paused. Did someone ask you to fix that? No. Why'd you? It was in the way. He nodded slowly, as if that explanation were incomplete but acceptable. Then he kept walking. Silence returned. The clock above admissions ticked to 2:17 a.m. Most staff felt that hour as heaviness behind the eyes. She felt it as clarity. Night narrowed the world. Fewer voices. Fewer movements. Patterns stood out sharper against quiet. Her hand rested lightly on the counter edge. Still. Listening. Not to conversations. To spacing. To rhythm. To absence. Somewhere outside, far beyond the ambulance bay doors, a sound tapped once against the night air. Soft. Distant. Almost nothing. No one inside reacted. Her eyes lifted slightly. She did not move her head. She did not change posture. She only listened. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing followed. She lowered her gaze again. Across the desk, a nurse whispered to another, glancing briefly toward her. She barely talks. Yeah. She's, what, new? Must be. They did not lower their voices much. They did not think they needed to. The quiet nurse continued aligning medication labels so the print faced the same direction. Perfectly parallel. A moment passed. Then another. The ER settled deeper into its artificial calm, the fragile kind hospitals mistake for safety. Her fingers paused on the last syringe wrapper. Not tense. Waiting. The first irregularity was sound. Not loud. Not sharp. Just wrong. It slipped through the ambulance bay doors when they opened for a routine arrival, a thin thread of noise that did not belong to traffic, wind, or machinery. By the time the doors shut again, it was gone. No one reacted. The quiet nurse lifted her eyes from the medication tray. She did not turn toward the entrance. She did not ask if anyone else heard it. She simply listened to the silence that followed. Silence could confirm more than noise. Behind the admissions counter, the security radio crackled once. Static. Then nothing. The guard tapped it with his palm. Loose wire, he muttered. He did not check the channel. She watched his hand, not his face. The radio light was dark. Not blinking. Off. He set it down and resumed scrolling through his phone. Her attention shifted to the wall clock. 2:23 a.m. She mentally marked the time without looking at it again. Across the room, a paramedic wheeled in an elderly patient complaining of dizziness. Routine intake. The triage nurse asked questions in a steady voice, fingers moving quickly across a tablet screen. Pain level? 3. Any falls today? No. Vitals were taken. Wristband printed. Paperwork attached. Everything ordinary. But the ambulance crew did not leave. They stood beside the stretcher half a second longer than necessary. Waiting. Not for instructions. For something else. The quiet nurse's gaze settled briefly on their boots. Mud along the outer tread. Dark soil. Fresh. There had been no rain that night. The ambulance bay concrete was dry. She looked at the wheels of the stretcher they'd rolled in. Clean. The mud had not come from hospital grounds. One of the paramedics caught her looking. He shifted his stance unconsciously, heel turning inward, protective posture. Not aggressive. Alert. She lowered her eyes back to her tray. He relaxed. The triage nurse handed the patient off toward observation beds. The paramedics finally turned to leave. As they pushed through the doors, one of them glanced back into the ER. Not at staff. At the exits. He was mapping them. The doors closed behind him. The quiet nurse's fingers rested on the counter edge again. Still. Listening. From somewhere down the corridor came the metallic squeal of a supply cart wheel. Normal. From the waiting room television, silent footage of a city street. Normal. From the security desk. Nothing. She looked. The radio still sat where the guard left it. Dark. She stood and walked past the desk without stopping. Her hand brushed the radio as if steadying herself. Her thumb slid across the power dial. A soft click. The light turned green. Static burst briefly, then settled into faint channel hiss. The guard glanced up. Oh. Thanks. She nodded once and continued walking. No explanation. No instruction. At the medication cabinet she opened a drawer, checked a label, and closed it again. Her reflection in the glass showed the ambulance doors behind her. Closed. Still. She watched them in the reflection for 3 seconds. 4. 5. Nothing moved. She turned back to the counter. Dr. Halvorsen strode past again, flipping through a chart. "We're still missing intake logs from that transfer earlier," he said to no one in particular. "Clerical must have forgotten to upload." The quiet nurse spoke quietly. "Which transfer?" He did not slow his pace. "Cardiac referral." "Doesn't matter. We'll find it." He disappeared into a patient bay. She did not follow. Instead she stepped to the terminal nearest her and woke the screen. Her fingers moved calmly across the keyboard. Search. Timestamp. Dispatch ID. Blank. She tried again with ambulance number. No entry. Not delayed. Absent. She logged out. No expression changed on her face. Across the room, laughter rose briefly from 2 interns comparing weekend plans. A coffee cup tipped slightly on the desk edge. Someone caught it before it fell. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary movement. Ordinary assumptions. The clock read 2:26 a.m. 3 minutes since the radio had been dead. She returned to her station. Aligned the chart stack again. Adjusted a pen so it lay parallel to the clipboard edge. Then she stood still. Listening. Outside, faint through concrete and glass. A distant pop. Soft. Controlled. Not echoing. Not random. Measured spacing. She did not look toward the doors. Her breathing did not change. No one else reacted. One of the interns glanced up. "You hear something?" The other shrugged. "Probably construction." They went back to talking. The quiet nurse's eyes lifted slightly. Not alarmed. Certain. Because construction did not fire in single shots. 5 seconds passed. Another distant sound. Same spacing. Same direction. Her hand rested lightly against the counter. Waiting. Across the ER, the automatic doors shuddered as wind pressed briefly against them from outside. The security guard frowned at the movement. "Storm coming," he murmured. She did not answer. Her attention remained on the entrance. Still. Measuring. The night had not changed. But its pattern had. And patterns, once broken, rarely repaired themselves. The doors did not open gently. They struck the wall with a flat metallic crack that silenced the room faster than any shouted command. 2 men came through first. Not patients. Not civilians. Their movement said that before their clothing did. They wore tactical vests half-zipped over dark uniforms, sleeves rolled tight, shoulders squared not from confidence but from readiness. Their eyes moved before their heads did, scanning corners, ceiling lines, reflective surfaces. One stepped inside and pivoted slightly left. The other angled right. They did not speak. Between them, they carried a third man. Blood soaked the front of his shirt, dark and spreading. His boots dragged once against the floor before one of the carriers adjusted his grip without looking down. The correction was smooth, practiced. The room froze. Not dramatically. Quietly. The difference mattered. A nurse near triage lowered her tablet. An orderly stopped mid-step. Someone's pen slipped from their fingers and rolled across the counter without being noticed. The quiet nurse had already moved. Not forward. Aside. 2 small steps to the right. Clear lane. She did it before the men reached the desk, before anyone called for space, before the stretcher wheels squealed as an orderly rushed one toward them. The tactical officers registered it. Not consciously. But their path never broke stride. They laid the wounded man onto the stretcher with controlled speed. One hand stayed pressed against the injury site, maintaining pressure. The other officer's head continued its slow sweep of the room. He was not looking for doctors. He was looking for angles. Dr. Halvorsen approached briskly, voice raised just enough to reclaim authority. What happened? What's his condition? The officer holding pressure did not look up. Gunshot. Through and through. Upper abdomen. 20 minutes. His tone was flat. Efficient. Not rushed. The doctor nodded sharply. Trauma bay. Now. Staff moved. But not together. One nurse reached for gloves. Another searched for saline. A resident bumped a tray and muttered an apology no one heard. The formation broke into pieces. The quiet nurse stepped forward. She did not announce herself. She did not ask permission. She simply walked beside the stretcher and adjusted the oxygen mask seal with 2 fingers as they moved. The officer on the left noticed. His eyes flicked to her face. Then to her hands. Then back to the hallway ahead. He said nothing. Inside Trauma Bay 3, the stretcher locked into place. The room filled with motion, drawers opening, packaging tearing, monitors beeping alive. Instructions overlapped. Equipment shifted. The quiet nurse stood at the patient's side. Still. Watching. The wound told its own story. Entry angle. Powder trace. Depth of soak. The bleeding was heavy but not explosive. Internal pooling likely. He was still conscious, barely. His pulse trembled against the monitor lead. One of the tactical officers stepped back toward the wall. Not resting. Positioning. He chose a spot where he could see both the door and the hallway reflection in the cabinet glass. The second officer stayed near the foot of the bed, arms loose but ready. His breathing was steady. Too steady for someone who had just run. His gaze shifted once across the room. It stopped on her. Noticed. Measured. The quiet nurse adjusted the 4-line height half an inch. Flow stabilized. No one else had seen it fluctuate. Dr. Halvorsen spoke rapidly, issuing instructions. Prep fluids. Cross-match. Where's radiology? A resident answered. On call. 5 minutes out. Make it 2. The officer by the wall spoke for the first time. Doors. The doctor looked at him. What? Secure your doors. Not loud. Not threatening. Certain. Halvorsen frowned. Hospital security handles that. The officer held his gaze. Did not argue. Did not explain. Just watched him. The doctor broke eye contact first. Across the room, the quiet nurse's hand rested lightly against the stretcher rail. Listening. Counting. Measuring distance between sounds beyond the walls. Footsteps in corridor. Cartwheel. Distant elevator bell. No sirens. That absence mattered. She glanced once toward the trauma bay entrance. The officer at the foot of the bed followed her line of sight automatically. Their eyes met for the first time. He studied her face for half a second. Then his posture changed. Subtly. Not relaxed. Aligned. As if something unspoken had just been confirmed. Behind them, the hallway lights flickered once. Staff barely noticed. The officer by the wall did. His hand moved slightly closer to his vest. The quiet nurse reached toward the supply counter and straightened a metal instrument tray that had been set down crooked. The tray stopped rattling. Silence sharpened. Outside, somewhere beyond concrete and glass. A distant pop. Closer now. This time, 3 people heard it. Only one of them understood what it meant. She did not look toward the sound. She only waited. The sound did not echo. That was the first confirmation. Gunfire that echoed meant distance or open space. Gunfire that did not meant walls. Structures. Angles that swallowed sound instead of returning it. Inside Trauma Bay 3, no one spoke about it. Not yet. Dr. Halvorsen leaned over the patient, voice tight with focus. Pressure's dropping. We need another line. Now. A nurse reached for a catheter kit and tore it open too fast. The packaging ripped unevenly. Plastic crinkled louder than it should have. The quiet nurse extended her hand. The other nurse passed the line to her without thinking. She inserted it cleanly on the first attempt. No adjustment. No second try. The monitor steadied by 2 beats. No one commented. Across the room, the officer near the wall tilted his head slightly. Listening. His eyes tracked the ceiling for a moment, as if mapping what lay above it. The second officer spoke under his breath, not to the room. That was closer. The quiet nurse did not look at him. But she heard. Footsteps pounded past in the hallway. Not running for help. Running away from something. Dr. Halvorsen snapped, "Focus, please. We are stabilizing a patient." His authority filled the room like a door closing. The officer's gaze shifted to him. Calm. Evaluating. He did not argue. But he did not look convinced. Another sound reached them. Not a gunshot. Metal striking tile. Followed by a sharp cry that cut off halfway through. The room froze again. This time longer. Someone whispered, "Was that?" The quiet nurse spoke softly. "Continue compression." The nurse at the chest resumed without realizing she had paused. The words had not sounded like a suggestion. They had sounded like timing. The officer at the foot of the bed turned toward her fully now. His eyes searched her face, not for reassurance, for confirmation. She did not meet his gaze. Her attention remained on the patient's 4-chamber, watching the drip rate. Steady. Behind them, voices rose in the corridor. Not shouting. Urgent. Overlapping. The kind of voices people used when they did not want to be heard far away. The wall-mounted radio crackled. Static. Then a burst of speech too fragmented to understand. Units, north entrance, repeat. Silence again. The doctor swore under his breath. Why is security not answering? No one had an answer. The officer by the wall spoke. You need lockdown. Halvorsen exhaled sharply. We have procedures for that. Use them. The tone was not louder than before. But it carried weight now. The doctor turned toward the door. Hesitation flickered across his face, not fear, calculation. He was a man used to being the highest authority in any room he entered. Here, that certainty was thinning. The quiet nurse adjusted the blood pressure cuff. Repositioned it 1 centimeter. The next reading displayed 10 points higher. Accurate. Still low. But accurate. She noted the number silently. Another sound outside. Closer again. Footsteps running past the trauma bay. Fast. Not staff. Staff slowed near patient rooms. These steps did not. The officer near the wall stepped toward the door and opened it 3 inches. He did not look out. He listened. The hallway lights flickered again. A shadow crossed the gap beneath the door. Running. Then gone. He closed it softly. When he turned back, his eyes went to the quiet nurse. This time he spoke directly to her. "You hear that?" It was not a challenge. It was a test. She answered without looking up. "Yes." Nothing more. The officer studied her for 1 second longer. Then he nodded once. Decision made. Behind them, the patient groaned faintly. His eyelids fluttered. Consciousness fighting its way back through blood loss. The quiet nurse leaned closer. Her voice lowered, steady and clear. "You're safe. Stay still." The man's breathing eased by a fraction. Across the room, one of the younger nurses whispered to another, "How is she so calm?" The second nurse shook her head. "I don't know." Near the wall, the tactical officer's hand moved to his shoulder mic. He pressed it. No signal. He tried again. Static. He lowered his hand slowly. Outside, something heavy struck a surface hard enough that the vibration traveled through the floor. Not near. Not far. Approaching. Inside the trauma bay, no alarm sounded. No announcement came over intercom. The hospital had not realized yet. But the timeline was closing. The quiet nurse reached to the counter beside her. Straightened a roll of gauze that had tilted sideways. Her movements remained unhurried. Measured. Certain. Across from her, the officer watched that small correction, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition. Not of her. Of what she was. He leaned slightly toward his partner and spoke under his breath. "Stay ready." The partner answered just as quietly. "I am." Neither of them took their eyes off her hands. Another distant sound echoed through the building. Closer than before. The quiet nurse finally lifted her gaze toward the door. Not alarmed. Prepared. The next sound was not distant. It was inside the building. Not close enough to see. Close enough to matter. It came as a dull concussive thud somewhere beyond the corridor walls, not sharp like gunfire, not metallic like dropped equipment. Something heavy striking a barrier. Or forcing one. Conversation in the trauma bay stopped without anyone agreeing to stop. The patient monitor continued its steady pulse. Fluids continued dripping. Oxygen continued hissing softly through tubing. Only the people had changed. The officer by the wall shifted his stance half an inch, placing his shoulder at a slight angle toward the door. His partner's hands loosened at his sides, fingers flexing once as circulation returned after carrying weight. Neither spoke. The quiet nurse listened. 3 seconds. 4. Footsteps again, this time slower. Measured. Not running. Approaching. Dr. Halvorsen noticed the silence and frowned. Why did everyone stop? No one answered him. Because they had not stopped. They had aligned. The footsteps passed the trauma bay door. Did not pause. Did not try the handle. Continued down the hall. The officer near the wall exhaled once through his nose. Not relief. Timing. The quiet nurse turned slightly toward the counter behind her. Mounted beside the supply cabinet was a wall radio, older model, hospital-issued, usually ignored unless transport teams needed directions. Its indicator light was dark. She stepped to it. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Her fingers rested on the dial and rotated it clockwise. Click. The light turned green. Static filled the small speaker, low and constant. Dr. Halvorsen glanced over. "What are you doing?" She did not answer. Her head tilted slightly toward the radio. Listening. Through the static came fragments of transmission, broken syllables, overlapping voices, signal interference. North, unit hold, repeat hold. Unknown number, armed. Perimeter. The officer at the foot of the bed went still. His eyes lifted to the radio. The quiet nurse pressed the transmit button. The room did not expect her voice. It came out calm. Even. Precise. "Unit at North Corridor," she said, "hold position. Do not advance blind corners. Cross coverage, 2 angles. Confirm." Silence followed. Dr. Halvorsen stared at her. One of the younger nurses blinked, confused. The radio crackled. A voice answered immediately. "Copy. Holding." Another voice cut in. "Who is this?" The quiet nurse released the button. She did not reply. The officers were staring at her now. Not surprised. Certain. The one near the wall stepped closer, just enough that his shoulder no longer touched it. His voice was quiet. "You monitoring their channel?" She adjusted the radio volume slightly. "Yes." No explanation. No justification. Just fact. The officer nodded once. Acceptance. Another transmission burst through. Movement East Wing. Suspects inside. Repeat, inside. Across the room, someone whispered, "Suspects?" The word spread through the air like cold. Dr. Halvorsen's expression tightened. "We need administration. Now." The officer near the wall spoke without raising his voice. "Admin's not your priority." The doctor turned. "Excuse me? Your patients are not hostile. Not confrontational. Final." Before the doctor could answer, the radio cracked again. "Unit split. Lost visual. Request direction." The quiet nurse pressed transmit. "Do not split," she said. "Rejoin. Hallways here intersect every 20 meters. Alone means blind." A pause. Then. "Copy. Rejoining." The younger nurse near the cabinet stared openly now. "How do you know that?" The quiet nurse released the button. She did not look at her. She did not answer. Because she had not needed to know the building. She only needed to understand the pattern. Footsteps outside again. Closer this time. Not hurried. Searching. The officer at the foot of the bed shifted his weight toward the door. The other officer moved half a step toward the center of the room, unconsciously placing himself between the entrance and the quiet nurse. Protection. Not ordered. Instinct. Another radio voice. "Command, we need layout confirmation." Static. No reply. The quiet nurse pressed transmit once more. Her tone did not change. "Emergency wing grid is square. 4 main corridors. Central nurse station hub. Do not funnel toward hub. Route outer ring." Silence. Then. "Understood." The officer near the wall watched her closely. Not curiosity. Recognition. "You've done this before," he said quietly. She adjusted the foredrip by a fraction. "No." The answer was simple. Neutral. Unprovable. Another impact echoed somewhere deeper in the hospital. Closer again. Dust drifted faintly from the ceiling vent. The radio hissed softly between transmissions. The doctor's voice came tight now. Someone needs to tell me what is happening. No one responded. Because something had already shifted in the room. Authority had moved. Not loudly. Not officially. But completely. And everyone felt it. The officer's hand rose slowly to his shoulder mic again. He pressed it. Still dead. He lowered it. Then he looked at her. Waiting. Not for permission. For instruction. The quiet nurse's eyes rested on the trauma bay door. Listening to the rhythm beyond it. Calculating distance. Timing. When she spoke, it was almost gentle. Stand by. The hallway lights dimmed. Not fully. Just enough that everyone noticed without understanding why. Inside Trauma Bay 3, the change showed first on reflective surfaces, metal trays losing their sharp glare, glass cabinets dulling, monitor screens appearing brighter against the room. Power fluctuation. Not failure. The quiet nurse watched the ceiling vent. Dust still drifted. Which meant the vibration source had not stopped. Outside, footsteps again. Closer. Slower. Deliberate. Not running anymore. Searching. The officer near the wall angled his body toward the door. His partner shifted half a step toward the opposite side, creating a diagonal line across the room. They did it without eye contact, without signal, without words. The quiet nurse noticed. She said nothing. On the stretcher, the wounded officer's pulse dipped. She adjusted the fluid rate. 2 millimeters. The line steadied. Across the room, Dr. Halvorsen snapped to a resident, "Why is radiology not here yet?" They said elevator delay. Another faint sound echoed from outside. Not a shot. Metal brushing against painted wall. The kind of contact made by something carried carelessly. Or intentionally low. The radio cracked alive again. Visual contact lost, hallway empty dash. The quiet nurse pressed transmit. "Do not clear rooms alone," she said. "Pairs only. Doors conceal angles." Her voice remained calm enough that it almost blended with the static. The reply came fast. "Copy." The doctor turned fully toward her now. "Who exactly are you talking to?" She released the button. "Units outside. That's not your responsibility." She met his eyes for the first time. Not challenging. Not apologetic. Just steady. They asked for direction. The statement held no pride. No emphasis. Only accuracy. Before he could respond, the corridor erupted with noise. Running footsteps. Multiple. Not scattered. Coordinated. The officers' heads turned toward the door simultaneously. The quiet nurse did not look. She listened. Stride length. Wait. Spacing. She counted silently. 3. Maybe 4. They passed the trauma bay. Did not stop. Did not check the door. One of the younger nurses whispered, "Are they coming here?" No one answered. Because no one knew. The officer at the wall moved closer to the frame, placing his hand lightly against it. Feeling vibration. Measuring distance through structure. The quiet nurse reached to the supply counter and slid a metal instrument tray 3 inches to the left. The path from bed to door cleared. No one had noticed it was blocked. Now it wasn't. Another radio transmission burst through. North stairwell compromised. Repeat. Static swallowed the rest. The officer near the wall spoke quietly. They're pushing inward. His partner nodded once. The doctor looked between them. Who is pushing inward? Neither officer answered. They were watching her. The quiet nurse pressed transmit again. Units near north stairwell, she said, fall back 10 meters. Hold intersection, not stairwell. Vertical spaces trap sound and sight lines. Silence. Then. Copy. Falling back. The younger nurse near the cabinet stared. How do you know where they are? The quiet nurse adjusted the patient's oxygen seal again. I don't. Which was true. She did not know their position. She knew their mistake. A heavy bang shook the corridor. Closer than before. This time the door handle rattled. Every person in the room went still. The officer's posture changed instantly, shoulders lowering, weight shifting forward, attention sharpening into a single point, the handle. It did not turn. After 2 seconds, footsteps retreated. The tension did not. The quiet nurse spoke softly. They're testing doors. The officer near the wall nodded once. Yes. Not agreement. Confirmation. Another transmission crackled. Command, we're boxed. Need direction. The quiet nurse pressed transmit. Move west corridor, she said. You have longer sightline there. Do not cluster. The reply came faster than before. Moving. The doctor stared at her. You can't just. He stopped. Because the officer near the wall had raised a hand slightly. Not at him. At her. A silent signal. Permission to continue. Authority had shifted again. Still no one announced it. The wounded man on the stretcher stirred weakly, trying to speak. The quiet nurse leaned closer. Save strength, she told him gently. His breathing steadied. Across the room, the younger nurse whispered, almost to herself, they're listening to her dash. The second officer answered quietly, without looking away from the door. They should. Another impact echoed through the corridor. Right outside this time. Not testing. Forcing. The handle jerked once. Hard. The quiet nurse's eyes lifted to it. Her voice remained calm. Positions. She had not raised her tone. She had not looked at the officers. But they moved instantly. One to each side of the frame. Ready. The door did not open. Not yet. But the pressure against it changed. Anyone close enough could feel it through the metal, a presence on the other side, testing weight, testing resistance, learning. Inside Trauma Bay 3, no one breathed loudly. The officers stood on opposite sides of the frame, bodies angled, not touching the wall, not centered. Their placement left a clear line between them, a corridor of space that would remain empty if the door burst inward. They had not discussed it. They had not needed to. The quiet nurse watched the handle. Not the door. The handle. Because the handle moved first. A faint scrape sounded from the hallway. Metal against painted surface again. The same sound as before. Closer. Slower. The wounded officer on the stretcher shifted weakly, trying to raise his head. Pain caught him halfway. A strained breath left his throat. The quiet nurse placed 2 fingers lightly against his shoulder. Stay down. Her voice was quiet enough that only he heard it. He obeyed instantly. Not because of her tone. Because of something in it. Across the room, Dr. Halvorsen swallowed. His earlier authority had not vanished, it had been replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. He looked toward the officers, then toward the nurse, then back to the door. What do we do? He asked. It was not directed at anyone. But the answer came anyway. We wait, she said. Her eyes never left the handle. The radio crackled again. Units repositioned, West Corridor holding dash. She did not respond this time. Because speaking now would cost sound. And sound carried. Outside the door, a shadow crossed the narrow gap beneath it. Paused. Shifted. Someone was standing there. Listening. Inside, the younger nurse near the cabinet trembled slightly. The quiet nurse saw it in the reflection of the glass, not directly. She reached behind her without turning and slid a sealed gauze pack across the counter toward the younger nurse's hand. The contact grounded her. The trembling slowed. No words exchanged. Another sound came from the hallway. Farther away. A shout. Then running footsteps heading in the opposite direction. The shadow beneath the door moved. Gone. The pressure vanished. The officers did not relax. They waited 5 seconds. 10. 15. Only then did the one on the left ease his shoulders a fraction. They're shifting sectors, he murmured. The quiet nurse nodded once. Not relief. Calculation. On the stretcher, the patient's monitor chirped, a thin warning tone. His blood pressure dipped again. Internal bleeding progressing. Time narrowing. She adjusted the fluid rate higher. Watched the line. Measured the drip. Her voice remained low. He needs surgery. Dar. Halvorsen blinked, pulled back into his role. We can't move him through open corridors. He will not last if we don't. The statement held no urgency. Only fact. The doctor's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. He also knew the hallway was no longer safe. The officers exchanged a glance. A decision passed between them. The one nearest her spoke quietly. We can escort. His partner nodded once. 2 minutes window if we clear path. The doctor looked at them sharply. You can't guarantee that. No, the officer said. We can't. Silence. The choice settled in the air. Risk moving him. Or lose him here. The quiet nurse's hand rested on the stretcher rail. Still. Thinking. Measuring not just distance and time, cost. Down the hall, faintly, a door slammed somewhere. Not close. Not far. The radio hissed softly. She looked at the wounded man's face. Pale. Sweat along his temple. Eyes half-focused but aware enough to understand tone, if not words. If they moved him, the hallway could expose everyone. If they stayed, he would bleed out. Her decision came without visible transition. She turned to the officers. You escort the team, she said calmly. Both men nodded immediately. Then she added. I stay. The doctor turned. What? She did not look at him. You move faster without extra body. The younger nurse whispered, you can't stay here alone. The quiet nurse met her eyes. Not stern. Not dramatic. Steady. I won't be alone. She gestured lightly toward the patient. The meaning was simple. Her duty remained. The officer nearest her studied her face carefully. Measuring. Assessing. Then he spoke quietly. You're sure? Not a question. Verification. Yes. One word. Final. Another distant impact echoed through the building. Closer than before. Time was gone. The officer nodded once. Decision accepted. He turned to his partner. 2-minute route. His partner moved to the door, listening again, mapping sound. Behind them, the quiet nurse checked the patient's line one more time. Steady hands. Even breath. No hesitation. She had chosen her position. And she would hold it. The hallway outside was no longer quiet. Not loud. Not chaotic. Active. Sound moved through it in layers, distant footfalls, a door closing somewhere, fabric brushing a wall, something light rolling briefly across tile before stopping. Each noise separate. Each one carrying direction. The officer at the door listened with his head slightly lowered, eyes unfocused. Mapping space without seeing it. Behind him, his partner adjusted his grip on the stretcher rail. "Ready," he said quietly. Dr. Halvorsen nodded once, tension tight in his jaw. The younger nurse positioned her hands near the stand, waiting. The quiet nurse stood beside the patient's shoulder. Still. Watching the officer at the door. Waiting for the signal she knew he would not give. Because he was waiting for hers. The radio hissed softly against the wall. A voice broke through. "West corridor holding. No contact." Another voice followed, strained. "Movement near imaging wing, can't see." Static swallowed the rest. The quiet nurse stepped to the radio. Pressed transmit. "West corridor units," she said calmly, "hold positions. Do not pursue sound. If you cannot see it, it sees you." Silence. Then. "Copy." Her thumb released the switch. She turned slightly toward the door. 30 seconds, she said. The officer did not ask how she knew. He trusted the timing. He cracked the door open 1 inch. Listened. No immediate movement. He opened it another inch. The hallway beyond showed a strip of dim light and empty floor. He glanced back once. She gave a small nod. He opened the door fully. "Move." The team stepped out together, stretcher rolling, stand gliding, shoes silent against tile. The quiet nurse did not follow. She remained inside the trauma bay doorway, one hand resting lightly against the frame. Watching. Listening. Tracking their progress by sound. Wheel rotation. Foot placement. Breathing rhythm. The radio crackled. Approaching intersection dash. Her thumb pressed transmit again. Stop. Out in the hallway, the stretcher wheels halted instantly. Inside the trauma bay, no one moved. She tilted her head slightly. Listening deeper. There. A shift of fabric against wall. Not theirs. Right side corridor. She spoke again. Step back 2 paces. Outside, shoes slid softly across tile as the team retreated. A shadow passed across the hallway opening, fast, silent, gone. Someone had just crossed their path. Had they continued forward, they would have met him at arm's length. The officer at the front exhaled once, almost soundless. The radio whispered. "We didn't see him dash." "I know," she replied quietly into the transmitter. "Wait." She counted silently. 1, 2, 3. Footsteps faded down the adjacent corridor. "Gone." "Proceed," she said. The stretcher wheels resumed. Inside the trauma bay, she closed her eyes for half a second. Not from fatigue. From concentration. Mapping distance. Time. Angle. The radio crackled again. Approaching turn dash. She answered before they finished. Take it wide. Corners hide depth. Copy. Their movement continued. The officer remaining inside the trauma bay watched her carefully. Not curiosity now. Recognition. Respect. Outside, the stretcher wheels slowed. Elevator ahead dash. She pressed transmit. Do not use elevator. A pause. It's fastest. No, she said calmly. It's a box. Silence. Then. Understood. Rerouting. The officer inside the room let out a slow breath through his nose. You just kept them alive, he said quietly. She did not respond. Her eyes remained on the open doorway, listening to the diminishing sounds of their retreat. Down the hall. Left turn. Long corridor. Farther. Safer. The radio hiss softened. Distance growing. The immediate danger in this section of the hospital was passing with them. But not gone. Another faint sound drifted from deeper in the building. A door opening slowly. Not near. Not far. The quiet nurse stepped away from the radio and gently closed the trauma bay door. The latch clicked. Soft. Final. She turned back to the room. The remaining officer was still watching her. After a moment, he spoke. Not loudly. Not formally. Just certain. You've done this before. She adjusted the blanket edge near the patient's shoulder. Smoothed a fold flat. No, she said. The answer sounded exactly the same as before. Calm. Simple. Unprovable. Outside, somewhere down the corridor, a voice shouted. Closer than she liked. Her eyes lifted toward the door again. Listening. Calculating. Preparing. The footsteps stopped. Not slowly. Not suddenly. Just held. Every person in the corridor, beyond the trauma bay and inside it, felt the pause before impact. Inside, the officers crouched slightly, hands ready. The quiet nurse remained upright, calm, a single hand resting on the stretcher rail. She counted heartbeats. Not hers. His. The patient's. 3 beats. 4. 5. Then the handle rattled. The door did not open. Not yet. A shadow appeared in the thin gap beneath the door. Not tall. Not short. Intentional. Measured. Testing the resistance again. The quiet nurse leaned closer to the patient. Adjusted the oxygen mask. Checked the line. Steady. She did not move elsewhere. Did not look toward the shadow. Because she did not need to. The officers understood. She had already mapped the threat. Not by sight. By sound. By spacing. By timing. By understanding instinctive movement. Another strike against the door, harder. The wall trembled slightly. Staff froze. The younger nurse's breath hitched. The quiet nurse's hand moved gently along the patient's arm, a reassuring presence, but her eyes scanned the room. Every monitor. Every tray. Every small surface. Angles. Lines of sight. Escape routes. Outside, a muffled voice called. Stop, hospital, hold dash. It came too late. They had already adjusted. The officer near the frame signaled silently to his partner. The shadow moved. Approach. She pressed a button on the radio. Transmission immediate. North Corridor units, intercept. 2 angles. Do not engage solo. Silence. Then, copy. The shadow halted again. Not retreating. Testing. Calculating. The quiet nurse remained calm. Measured. Finally, a footstep pressed against tile outside the bay. 1. 2. 3. A weapon clicked softly. She leaned forward slightly. Adjusted the patient's leg angle. Calm. Precise. The officer's eyes met hers. No words. They understood she had already prepared contingency. Another footstep. Then a pause. The shadow remained. The officers exhaled slightly. Movement in the hallway shifted as if someone had reconsidered. The radio crackled. Holding, not advancing dash. She released her breath softly. The officer's posture relaxed fractionally. The immediate threat had not left. But it had acknowledged authority. Not hers officially. But hers practically. A faint groan came from the patient. She bent slightly, checked pulse, stabilized line. Small adjustments. Actions, not words. The door remained closed. No one outside pushed further. No one inside panicked. The quiet nurse pressed a hand briefly on the stretcher rail. A subtle movement. Enough for the officers to know. Patient secure. Staff safe. Room intact. Outside, footsteps faded. Measured. Retreating. One of the officers finally spoke quietly. "You didn't move." Her eyes did not leave the patient. "I stayed." He nodded once. No praise. No acknowledgement. Just recognition. The danger had tested them all. And she had held the line. Not with force. Not with bravado. But with calculation. With quiet command. With presence. The radio hissed softly. Silence settled. The patient's breathing normalized slightly. The younger nurse let out the first audible breath since the arrival. The quiet nurse adjusted the four-drip again. Subtle. Precise. Unseen by most. Authority confirmed not by words or salutes. But by survival. Chapter 10, Aftermath. Word count target, 780. The hospital returned to its rhythm. Not fully. Not like before. But quiet settled where tension had been. The officers moved out first, escorting the wounded patient down the cleared corridor. Wheels squeaked softly, voices muted. The youngest nurse stepped back to watch the stretcher disappear into the elevator bay. Her hands flexed at her sides, still trembling slightly from adrenaline. Dr. Halvorsen exhaled, shoulders tight, pacing once near the counter. "I don't understand what just happened," he muttered. Not for her ears, but she heard anyway. She didn't answer. She only checked the monitor. Flow steady. Pulse climbing back toward normal. Oxygen stabilized. Line secure. Nothing left unobserved. The younger nurse approached cautiously. How did you know what to do?" The quiet nurse offered nothing but a small nod. No explanation. No instruction. The words were unnecessary. The hallways beyond were quiet. Footsteps had faded. Voices of the tactical team were gone. Only the hum of machines, the whisper of air vents, the faint click of automatic doors remained. She straightened a misaligned instrument tray. Adjusted a paper stack. Checked a label. Every small detail returned to perfect order. Dr. Halvorsen moved past her station, muttering as he went. No apology. No praise. Only the weight of what had occurred pressed between them. He understood authority had been present, just not his. The younger nurse lingered. "Do you ever get recognized for this?" The quiet nurse glanced at her briefly. Then returned her gaze to the monitor. "Not usually." She adjusted the blankets on the patient's bed. Folded edges perfectly parallel. A single detail in a room of chaos that mattered more than it appeared. Outside the trauma bay, the hallways were silent. Emergency lights hummed softly. The faint scent of antiseptic hung in the air, mingling with the residual tension. She moved slowly down the aisle between beds. Checked an 4 pump. Adjusted tubing. Realigned a monitor cable. Subtle movements, unnoticed by most, but keeping the environment safe. The younger nurse watched her. "You're always like this?" A pause. "Yes." No pride. No boast. Just fact. She returned to the central station, clipboard in hand. Aligned papers once more. Tapped a pen lightly against the edge of the counter. Everything in place. Everything ready. The hospital had survived the immediate danger. But no one outside the trauma bay knew how close it had been. No one would ever fully understand the orchestration that had kept them alive. She walked slowly to the medication cabinet. Rechecked labels. Straightened a syringe tray. Each action precise, quiet, essential. The clock above admissions ticked forward. Time resumed. No one called her name. No applause. No acknowledgement. She did not look for it. The room returned to its rhythm. Staff resumed ordinary movements, checking vitals, restocking supplies, moving quietly from bed to bed. She remained at the center, hands lightly resting on the counter. Watching. Waiting. Prepared. Even in calm, still aware. The authority that had protected everyone was not spoken of. Not rewarded. Not recognized. It existed anyway. Unseen, unheralded, unbroken. The quiet nurse continued her work. Exactly as she always did. The night had ended. Not with fanfare. Not with spotlight. Only quiet competence. Only survival. Only presence.